Alrighty, what's going on, everybody? I'm back with another podcast. Today we're doing Coach Ryan Smith from Fort Madison, and he's been the Fort Madison wrestling coach for like 20 plus years, and he's been a football coach middle school, and I think he's moving up to high school this year. So that's exciting. But with that said, I'll let him kind of introduce himself and who he is and everything like that.
Well, let me first commend you, Sam. Pretty proud of what you're doing with yourself as a young man politically and with the podcast. There's no way when I was your age that I would be doing this stuff. So I commend you for that and pretty proud of what you're doing with your life. But so yeah, Ryan Smith, I teach Spanish at Fort Madison High School. This is my 23rd year of doing that. Was an assistant wrestling coach for Mike Riley my first year in Fort Madison. I'm not from here originally, but and then took over the varsity the following year. So actually, yeah. So that'd be 22nd year of head wrestling coach. And then I did middle school football for, I think, my first 15 years. And then took a few years where I went down to the youth level and did that for about 4 years. And then came back to the middle school 3 years ago now. Yep, plan on moving up to the high school. So excited about that as well.
Yeah, sweet. And thank you for your kind words. It means a lot coming from you. I think everybody in our community and that's gone to Fort Madison would say the same. So talk a little bit about how you got into teaching / coaching. Were you planning on becoming a teacher when you got into college? And we'll talk a little bit about your college athletic career here in a little bit. But was that your plan to go into coaching or in teaching?
So yeah, I watched your episode with Coach Doherty, and I was probably the same way. I knew I loved sports and was hoping to do something with sports in my life. But coming out of high school, my actual original plan when I went to the University of Iowa was to be a pharmacist. I was in the pre-pharmacy program. And quite honestly, the chemistry at Iowa was a little tougher than chemistry I had in high school. I did well in high school at that, but then at college, I'm like, oh, wow, maybe this isn't for me. And changed gears, always in the back of my head, knowing I wanted to be involved with sports somehow. So then I switched to a math major, actually, where I thought maybe I would get into math education. And I was rolling along pretty good in math, and then I got to like Calc 3, and all of a sudden I kind of hit a wall in Calc 3. Calc 1 and 2 were tough, but was able to get through it. And I'm like, all right, I might have to reevaluate my plan here. And then I had an older brother that's 3 years older than me that went to Loras College and had majored in Spanish, and he was just finishing up his career there, and that kind of planted a seed in me. And I'm like, well, maybe that's the route to go. I've always enjoyed the language. We had a good high school program in Dubuque at Dubuque-Wahlert. So I was actually taking some Spanish classes at Iowa as part of my, undergrad. I needed some Spanish hours. And I was, breezing through the Spanish compared to the math and the pre-pharmacy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, and the other big thing is, my brother said there's a high demand for Spanish teachers. So, ideally I would have liked to have been in physical education, but I kind of knew that getting a job in that field is a lot more challenging. So I ran with the Spanish, and I'm glad I did. Got to study in Spain for a summer, my senior year, and one of the best experiences of my life. And and then actually, so I got my degree in Spanish from Iowa, and I still didn't have my teaching stuff yet because I spent time with my pharmacy and chemistry and math, and so I didn't get my education yet. So I actually went to Loras to finish up my education classes and student taught and whatnot. So
Okay, yeah, sweet. That answers my next question. I was gonna get into like why you got into Spanish, because it's kind of that's not a random thing, but it is something that, I mean, most people would say, oh, I want to be a science teacher or a physical education teacher, like yourself, a guy like yourself.
Sure.
So maybe talk a little bit about how Fort Madison got so lucky to land you as a Spanish teacher and as a wrestling coach.
Well, you're being kind of generous there with the lucky part, but um, so you know, after I student taught, it was in that spring of my student teaching. You know, back then you read the Des Moines Register to find jobs. They didn't have online searches and whatnot, and Teach Iowa now is the big one. But anyway, so I was reading the Des Moines Register, looking for their teaching openings, and you know, Fort Madison was one. There was a couple others. Des Moines Public Schools was looking to. I think I sent an application there as well. Ottumwa was another one. But I remember seeing Fort Madison, and that intrigued me as a wrestling person, because the only two things I really knew about Fort Madison was the prison, because when we drive to St. Louis, you know, as kids, we would drive through Fort Madison, see the prison. I knew about that. Then as a wrestling person, I knew of Mick Pickford and the freestyle tournament. So I'd wrestled that in high school and in college a couple of times as well. So the Fort Madison really intrigued me. And, you know, I sent 3 or 4 applications out. And I think Fort Madison was the first school to get back to me. Remember coming down for the interview and knowing nothing, you know, very little about Fort Madison. But anyway, I remember Larry Shiley was a principal back then, and Mick Lobach was the AD back then. I remember them touring me around the school. And so, so basically it was just looking in the newspaper and finding a spot that I wouldn't mind going. And, you know, compared to the Des Moines, I didn't know that I wanted to go to a huge city like that for my you know, first job out of college. Fort Madison, I just like the size of the school and the town and the community. So.
Okay, sweet. How has Fort Madison as a high school changed since then? Do you have any? Has it changed a lot, or is it kind of more or less the same?
You know, you know, it's a little bit of both, I would say. So yeah, I've been here 23 years. So just kind of reflecting back a little bit, I don't know that there's a huge difference in the kids necessarily. I just think it's more of the how teaching has changed and adapted over the years. Just our grading philosophy and things like that, I think have changed a lot. Maybe the biggest thing I would say that has changed is the work ethic. Maybe that's just me being old and thinking that way. But, you know, I have no complaints with my classes. I would say if I were to pick one thing, it just seems like maybe the academic work ethic is maybe not quite as high.
Yeah. So, and this is a question that I posed to Coach Doherty as well, and it's not a life question, but what drives you when it comes to teaching? Specifically, we'll get into coaching in a little bit, but when it comes to teaching, what kind of drives you? Is it the idea of helping kids and helping them learn another language and learn about other cultures? Is that kind of the main focus, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, that's a big part of it, of course, but, you know, I'd like to, like in my first couple of days of the course, is just say, hey, we're going to build skills that won't only help you in Spanish, but they're going to help you in other classes and in your future careers and whatnot. Just like being punctual, being on time, paying attention, being responsible, being prepared for things. Even though you might not love Spanish, if you can learn Spanish, then you can learn almost anything, because it's not an easy thing to do. So, so I make sure they know it's challenging, but it's rewarding. There is a high demand for Spanish speakers in our country, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon. That demand for speaking another language is only going to grow. So, but no, the biggest thing, I want to prepare them for life after school, and when we get to students that like go on to college and minor in Spanish and even major in Spanish, which we've had quite a few do that, you know, that makes you feel good. But ultimately, you want them to be prepared for what's next. You know, for people that take Spanish, majority move on to college of some sort. So I want them to make sure they're ready for that.
Yeah, and I think that kind of can be said for like a lot of other classes too, like something like math. Like when you get into like algebra 2, the later math courses, it's not necessarily about the math anymore, but it's more about working through like problem solving. That's what I always saw it as. Like they always try to answer the question like, when am I ever going to use this, whatever. It's not necessarily that you're going to use it, it's that you're growing as a person and working through a problem, and that's kind of the point of it.
Exactly. I like to use the analogy, like for athletes, you lift weights.
Yeah.
So to get stronger. So for academically, to exercise your brain, you need to take challenging courses. Even if you don't love them, you're exactly right. It's like exercise for your brain. You might not always love it, but it is beneficial.
Yeah. So maybe not in the beginning of when you first came here, because I'm assuming you knew basically nobody when you first came here, other than maybe you knew Pickford a little bit from wrestling. So maybe not in the beginning, but more or less nowadays, is this another question I asked Coach Doherty, is balancing teaching and coaching in family life, is that a challenge for you? Have you had to, since you've raised your family here, obviously, and your family's grown up here, has it been hard to switch and focus on family life and kind of shut coaching and teaching out when it's time to come down to that?
That's a good question too. I should probably have my wife answer this one. um, I think I've gotten better. I definitely, especially before I was married and had kids, I spent oodles and oodles of hours doing it. I've tried to separate coaching and family, and now having children that are in sports as well. I try to be coach during the sporting season, but once we get home, I actually don't like to talk about it a lot at home. Sometimes my wife will ask me wrestling questions during wrestling season, and sometimes I'm not real talkative about that just because it's on my mind so much. Sometimes I like to shut it off when I'm at home, but I don't do that intentionally to make her mad. But I do need to turn the switch off a little bit in my life. Otherwise, I do get consumed with the sports. So
Yeah. So you've obviously been teaching, 20 plus classes over the years, classes in terms of like graduating classes. So what has that taught you by teaching them? Is there anything that you've learned over the 20 years of coaching and teaching that is valuable to you?
Well, just the biggest thing is watching them be successful once they walk out our doors, because it is hard to prepare for the world, especially I think now it's even maybe more challenging. There's just a lot of weird distractions out there. But students like you, it makes me proud to see you guys doing positive things. And there's lots of other students like you over the years that have gone on to be productive citizens, and just learning how to work hard and overcome obstacles, because high school is challenging, not just academically, but the other things you go through socially. So I guess that's makes me feel good when people graduate and then they continue to work and strive for success in their life.
Sweet. So we kind of gone in depth about your teaching philosophy, your teaching, everything to do with teaching. Let's kind of switch gears into coaching specifically. So what is your coaching philosophy? Is it kind of the same as the teaching philosophy? Are the two like interchangeable, or how do they differ?
Yeah, so I think that a good teacher is a good coach is a good teacher. I think they go hand in hand. It's not always the case, I guess, but usually I think so. I take both jobs very seriously. I don't want to be, considered a good coach but a bad teacher. I want to be a good teacher and a good coach. But so when I was in college, I took a theory of coaching class. You had to write down your coaching philosophy. And I can sum it up in three things. And this hasn't changed since I was in college. But number one is work hard is one of my philosophies. Number two, improve every day. And then number three, have fun. Okay, those have been my three core principles that I've tried to stress in my coaching: is work hard, improve every day, and have fun. So the fun part is probably the hardest sometimes, because especially sports like wrestling and football. It's a lot of grueling, hard, dirty work, so to speak. So having fun can be a challenge, but I think I've gotten better at that part, even though back when I was a young coach, that was always on my mind, was make sure we have fun. But I've probably gotten better at that in the last 5, maybe 10 years of making sure that we do play games and have some fun.
Sweet. So you obviously wrestled at Iowa, wrestled under Dan Gable. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of wrestling people listening to this who might want a little insight into what Dan Gable's room was like. So maybe kind of talk a little bit about what practices were like in a Dan Gable wrestling room.
Yeah, so I did walk on there. I mean, I definitely was not a blue chip recruit by any means, but I knew I wanted to go to Iowa as a student, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it, man. I'm gonna walk on and see what happens. And 5 years later, I came away with probably, I might consider that the best experience of my life. It's top 3 for sure as far as experiences in my life. Tremendously difficult, but extremely rewarding as well. Took a lot of butt whoopings, but in turn that helped me how to whoop some butt a little bit towards the end of my career. But anyway, Coach Gable was a huge influence. Obviously, growing up in Iowa, he's been coaching back. So he started like in the mid '70s at Iowa. So, I was born, just a little before that. But '80s, '90s, he was the man. So followed him, his teams, and knew of his reputation. And all I can say is that once I was in his presence, it's hard to explain. It was almost, he was almost superhuman. Just his aura, his physical, not, his physical strength, but also just his mental strength and just his attitude. And, he was great to be around. And probably one thing that a lot of people don't know is his sense of humor. He was kind of a funny guy. When he worked hard, you knew it, but what I appreciate is that he had a good sense of humor. He would crack jokes and keep things light as well. So,
yeah, I mean, that's extremely interesting to kind of dive into that, because obviously everybody in the wrestling world knows who Dan Gable is, but maybe not that side of Dan Gable. I mean, the joking side that you just kind of brought to light. So is there any memories that stick out in your mind being under Dan Gable at all?
I mean, just like I said, like when he was like at practice, we warm up and it's pretty much a live brawl for like 2 hours after that. But like when you knew he was standing there in your area watching you wrestle, it just seemed like your effort raised like tenfold. I mean, it was kind of, weird, sort of, I guess. But he just his presence, just really, I don't think I'm the only one that probably feels that way. He elevated your performance and your effort. I don't know how he did it, but I also remember, so like he was probably in his mid 40s when I was, going through there. But he didn't go live a lot with like the Brands brothers and things like that. But he would grab the younger walk-on types like me, and people like to scrap and get after it. And I remember, he'd usually start, he would go bomb. He's like, all right, try to turn me. And it's like grabbing his arm was like trying to grab a steel rod. I mean, I couldn't budge it. And then when he would get on top, he would smother you. He would get you on your back, and he would like put his armpit over your face so you couldn't breathe, and stick his forearm in your face and whatnot. But and then on your feet, man, just hand fighting with him, my arms would turn into jelly in like 2 minutes. It was weird how, there were some tough dudes in that room that I worked out with, but none that made my body feel like such a, I don't know what the word is. I felt so weak wrestling him. My arms would turn to jelly, and he would touch your legs and you'd like fall down. I mean, you're trying hard, but he was on a different plane. Let's put it that way. So.
Yeah. And that's pretty freaking amazing considering how you said he was like in his mid 40s or whatever. Yeah. That's great. That's literally insane.
Something superhuman about him.
Yeah. So what are some memories that stick out in your mind about your Fort Madison head coaching career? What is there any memories when I say think of something that is an amazing memory that sticks out in your mind? What comes to mind?
Um, I don't know. Obviously, state tournament uh, brings back really good memories. State finals. Being in the corner for that. But overall, just when I think back as a program, I'm just proud of the work ethic. We don't always have the most talented team, but we work our butts off and we win a lot of meets that we probably aren't supposed to, just because of our effort and attitude is superior to a lot of teams. So just the amount of conference championships we've won in the last 23 years. I think we've won 17 or something in the last 23 years.
Yeah, and we're
So
back on track too, right? 2 in a row, right? Last 2
yeah,
years.
back on
Yeah, back
track.
on track.
We had like a 5-year gap, I think, which was a long 5 years, but we are back on track. We've got 2 in a row now. But so I guess that's just the teams over the years. We consistently are competitive. You know, as a team, I think back to our, let's see, what year would this have been? Oh, 03 or 04 maybe, but went 18-1 in dual meets. Was a fun year. That was Coach Doherty and Coach Rickelman's senior year. And then I think it was 2006. We got 4th place at the traditional state tournament, like 2 points, 3 points behind Waverly for a trophy. That's kind of bittersweet. It's a good memory that a little school like Fort Madison was, knocking on the door of a trophy. But that was a pretty phenomenal year as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember being obviously in AE my like junior and senior year when we do it consistently, where we took it to the next level. Kind of that's when it kind of started taking off a lot. Coach Doherty's AE program, and I remember you're like one of the only teachers / coaches that was there consistently every single day at 7 in the morning in the summers and when you could during the school day and all that kind of stuff. So. Do you think that how important is training, lifting, and all that kind of stuff for a wrestler?
Oh, I mean, it's tremendously important, and that's why we're fortunate to have Coach Doherty doing what he's doing. But man, back in the day, it was probably a luxury, and if you did it, that was going to get you, way ahead. But now, just to stay even, you've got to do it to just stay even with people, because most people have figured it out. Schools have figured out that you got to do this to be successful in sports. So if you're not doing it, I mean, unless you're a freak athlete, which, those guys are few and far between, your chances of success are a lot lower if you're not doing it. So, yeah, I'm very happy for that program and Coach Doherty, what he's done, getting excitement around that program. So it's been huge to our success, not only in wrestling, but football and every sport, female sports, male sports. It's equal opportunity for anybody that wants to work and can get in there and get the job done.
Yeah. So kind of getting towards the back end here, maybe give some advice to maybe a young kid that wants to get into wrestling but isn't sure, or maybe a freshman in high school or even a senior in high school that might want to come out. What would you say to that person if they want to come out for wrestling and try it out?
Yeah, I would. I've got a sign on my door in my classroom. Says, "You never know. You never know if you don't try," or something along those lines. And it shows a wrestler lifting a guy. You just don't know until you try. You don't want to look back and say, "Yeah, I should have done that." I hear that a lot. Yeah, I should have done it. And I've heard some of the football players this year make that comment that I should have wrestled. Actually, that reminds me, at Iowa, Gable had this poster of 3 sumo wrestlers hanging up in the locker room. Should have been, could have been, and would have been. Those were the three sumo guys. Just like, don't be a shoulda, coulda, woulda guy. Be a do guy. So I know it's intimidating, but man, we've had some kids that came out as sophomores in high school or juniors in high school, and were extremely competitive, and we're glad that they did it. So, you know, I know it can be scary and intimidating. You know, maybe you don't want to wear a singlet, but I don't know. There's 100 reasons why you don't do something, I guess, but you have to find one reason why you're going to do it. It's like Coach Doherty said, it's a different breed, and but you know, I owe wrestling a lot, and that's probably why I got into coaching is because I want to, you know, pay it forward, so to speak. It's done so much for my life that I want to provide that opportunity to others, because it is a life-changing experience. And I didn't get started till late. You know, I didn't really get into it until about 7th grade. But once I did get into it, it did change my life.
Yeah, and it definitely is a grind. I mean, even by today's standards, I mean, it's grueling. It's a grind. The season, it's long. It gets hard. You're tired, but it's like you said, it's worth it. It's 100% worth it, and you'll feel great once you're done with the season. It's the most rewarding thing that you can imagine, especially as like a high schooler.
For sure.
So, what's any advice for a new teacher or a new coach getting into coaching and teaching? What's some advice that you would have for that person?
You know, just stick with it. You know, looking back, you know, I never looked too far ahead. I just always took it one step at a time, and here I am 23 years later. But just don't, you know, keep your focus narrow. Yeah, you have a big picture view, but you know, just take it one step at a time, and before you know it, you work through those obstacles and those you know, tough times, and learn how to handle it and deal with it. And the world needs teachers. The world needs coaches. I know a lot of people think, you know, teaching's you know, an easy gig. You get your summers off and whatnot. But my response is, okay, get your teaching certificate and do it.
Yeah.
So the world needs it. So I encourage people, you know, and I forget what the rate is of teachers that leave after 2 or 3 years, but it's pretty high. So big thing is find someone to lean on as well. And that's something education's done a better job of, is providing mentors and things like that to help new teachers. Yeah, it's kind of funny thinking back to my first couple of years. They didn't really have mentors back then. The teaching staff was great. They all pop in and check on me, but kind of looking back, I remember feeling a little bit isolated that first year. But anyway, I just think persistence and you know, it's not always going to be rosy and fun, but it's kind of like wrestling. It's worth it when it's over. You know, you can really change a lot of lives and help people. So.
Alrighty.
Nice.
Yeah. Great advice. Is there any final thoughts that you want to throw in here? Any ideas that pop into your mind that you want to talk about in terms of the football program, wrestling program, weightlifting, anything?
I'm very excited about the future of Fort Madison as a high school, and academically and as athletically. We're going through some big changes academically with our grading procedure. It's going to be more of a standards based than a, you know, percentage, you know, 80%, 90%. It's going to be more based on, you know, how do you perform the skills that you're expected to. So that's kind of a new territory that we're diving into as a high school. And then, you know, athletically, Coach Doherty taking the helm with football is a big thing. He's doing a great job of promoting that and getting kids excited. And I'm excited to be on board with that as well, at, you know, not just at the lower levels, but moving up and being a part of that. That's very exciting. Wrestling wise, you know, I'm always excited about that. It doesn't take much. Excited about that. I think our future's bright there as well. But that's Oh my God, I think.
Yeah,
I just
you
want to get
mentioned
into politics with you. Uh,
not yet. We'll say that for
maybe
another.
another show we can talk politics.
Yeah. Also, it just popped in my mind that it sucks that we got shorted and by not being able to see Iowa win their first national championship in quite I don't know when's the last time they won it. It was like
2010, I believe.
yeah. I mean they for sure would have won it. It
Yeah.
sucks that we didn't get to see
Yeah.
Spencer win his third and you know.
Yes.
But yeah, from all of Fort Madison and especially Fort Madison Wrestling, like sincerely thank you for everything that you do for everybody, and especially in the wrestling community. You're a legend around the Fort Madison wrestling world and even in the Iowa wrestling world. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Sam, and you were a pleasure to coach. We could use, if we had a dozen of you every year, we would be whooping some tail. But you were a pleasure to coach, and I still, there's part of me that I still, hurt for your senior year, and that, well, even pretty much your whole high school career was injury riddled. But I think you could have won the state title, but your shoulder had other ideas. So,
Yeah,
but you got to experience the state tournament. But you belonged on the podium. I'll say that. But
yeah, thank you.
yeah.
So yeah, that's gonna wrap it up. That was Coach Ryan Smith from Fort Madison, the head wrestling coach, and now assistant for Fort Madison football. Thank you.